this is what they mean by stage fright. So my name's Mark Edlen, and I guess I'm what you'd call a green or a sustainable developer. And if I left you with two thoughts today, they would be as follows. The first one is I think green cities, sustainable cities, are a big part of the solution to the environmental challenges that we face, not only here in the United States, but across the world. The second thought I would leave you with is just doing green cities or sustainable cities is not enough. What we need to think about is how to build vibrant, rich cities where people can come together and interact. My crossroads is what I'd like to talk about today and the three passions in my life. And it was interesting listening to the three prior speakers because I saw a connection with each one of them that I'll try to touch on as I go through. I have three passions. The first is like most of us, and that's my family. And Greg, your wife is not the only perfect person in the world. My wife is as well. The second one, a lot of people think are opposed to each other and question, are they really connected? And I think they're intimately connected, and that's my love of the built environment and my love of the natural environment. So my story is about a guy who liked to fish, and this is Bob. And the two of us were fortunate to grow up in the Pacific Northwest and enjoy the rich outdoor life that we have here, whether it was fishing, as you're seeing Bob doing here, or kayaking, or skiing, or golfing, or whatever the case may be. And that really informed us about our second passion, which was the built environment. And it caused us to think about doing it differently. We love to build things, offices, apartments, theaters like this, and we love to build things in a sustainable fashion. So we thought in the early days it was pretty cool just to conceive, design, and build a building. But then we started to think about what was the real impact that that building had in the environment that we were building within and the communities that we were building in. So we started to think differently and started to think about what we all know as a triple bottom line, and that's people, planet, and prosperity for the communities that we live within. That kind of led us to think about a notion that we like to call principles of place. It's not just enough to build green buildings, but think about where you build them and how you enable people to bring together community. So one of the things that we noticed, we were aging. I like to joke I used to be 6 foot tall and had a full head of hair, and this is what's left. And my wife says, I keep doing what I'm doing, she's had it. Bob and I noticed that we were aging. Our parents were aging, our children were aging, and some of our children are even having grandchildren of their own. Listening to Bobby, it made me think about our notion of generations. And the thing we came to realize is we don't have a consumer product that maybe in a year or 5 years like this clicker is going to be used up and tossed away. These buildings are going to be here for 100 to 200 years. So much like Bobby, we tried to think about how these have an impact on these communities for the years to come. Also, with cities growing quickly, we knew we needed to get it right, and we didn't have time to make mistakes. So our crossroads was how to enable healthy, sustainable growth. What are the statistics? They're pretty daunting. Cities are growing quickly in the United States, as you can see from this slide. And if you think they're growing quickly here, it's staggering what's happening worldwide. We read about new cities coming around in China virtually every week. You can see from this slide that we're expecting to move from 3.3 billion people living in cities to over 6 billion people over the next 50 years. The population is exploding. What impact does that have, all those people moving into cities, on the buildings that they're moving into and living in, as well as on the communities they're in? I'm told that 72% of all electricity in the United States consumed is used either building these buildings or operating these buildings. 72%, big opportunity. 40% of the CO2 emissions come out of these buildings. However, for me, I think maybe more interesting two statistics that I've latched onto. In the United States, we waste $87 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars every year, sitting in our cars, wasting our time, and paying to put fuel in those cars while we're sitting there wasting our time. Imagine, $87 billion. What would that do for education? The second one is the notion that every one of those cars we take off the road eliminates about 12,000 pounds of CO2. Again, coming back to the principles of place and where you build and how you build and the difference that it can make. So how could we move the needle forward? Well, we like to think about green cities. There's a lot of naysayers out there. Greg talked about that a little bit this morning. However, I think there's an opportunity out there, and that opportunity is twofold. We have two of the biggest generations moving through the population right now ever. My generation, the baby boomers, and my kids' generation, Gen Y. And I think Gen Y owns sustainability in the environment, if you will. If we really put our shoulder behind it, I think we have the opportunity to move the needle and move it quick. We have a significant advantage here in Portland, and that is I think we have a deep-seated expertise in sustainability in many fields: agriculture, transportation, planning, as well as green buildings. We also have a unique culture of collaboration. We have a method here to work together where we have the public side and the private side working arm in arm, trying things that may not be quite ready for prime time, trying to move the needle forward and make good things happen in our communities and in our buildings. So what did we do? Well, we turned to technology, right? Technology's got to be the solution. We've all got it. We got it in our pocket. We got it in our lap. We've got it everywhere. So we stuffed our buildings full of technology, from solar panels to cogen to geothermal. We even put wind turbines on the roof to see if we could harness the wind and drive electricity in the building that way. How many of you heard of a membrane bioreactor? Probably not many. Yep, somebody raised their hand. We actually put one of those in a building where we process 100% of the sewage inside the building. It's not connected to the sewer system. But you know what we uncovered? About 5 years ago, we decided we were putting so much technology into our buildings, you almost had to have a master's in engineering to run them. And that couldn't be right. So we started to think about how could we harness nature and natural systems to move our buildings forward and use passive systems as opposed to technological systems. The second thing we started to think about was community. And what we started to hear come back from our early, highly sustainable buildings were stories, and two of them that I'll relate to you today. One is out of one of the apartment buildings. And we had, all of a sudden, one of our property managers came to me and said, they're running a contest. And I said, who's they? And they said, the tenants. I said, what kind of a contest? Thinking maybe who's got the biggest flat screen or who's got the newest, fastest computer. The contest they were running was who had the lowest utility bill each month. People were starting to live and think differently. In one of our office buildings, we had one of our tenants, large tenants, come to us and said, you know, our sick time, think of Brian and Jim, our sick time is down 20% since we moved into this building 5 years ago. Not only that, they found that they had a hiring advantage. They were going after those young undergraduate students, the graduate students, and the law school students. And those students were coming to them partially because of where they were, in a vibrant community, and partially because they're in a highly sustainable building. So it started to cause us to think more about how sustainable buildings and vibrant communities actually creates a deeper, richer sense of community. And again, coming back to the principles of place. So what are those? The air we breathe. Listening to Brian and Jim harkened me back to a notion that I've thought of for many years, and that is healthy buildings, healthy communities, healthy citizens. Over the years, we've allowed ourselves to occupy buildings that are full of chemicals and toxins. So the first thing we did was get rid of them. Take the glues out of the wood panels. Take the glues out of the carpets. Think about how to get rid of that new car smell or that new building smell. And speaking of fresh air, if you look under your seat at the next break, you'll notice there's vents under your seat. So what's happening in this building, instead of driving all the cool air down from the ceiling with a big mechanical system, it's being introduced underneath, and you got the cool air chasing the warm air up and out of the building, creating a healthier environment for you. Number two is power to the pedestrian. One of my good friends says that the success of a building is measured by the first 30 feet, and that is what the pedestrian interacts with is that first 30 feet from the sidewalk. I often think a good metric of success in a building, jaywalking. Portland police might not agree, but my belief is if the pedestrian is empowered to jaywalk, that says that he or she not only owns the sidewalk, but they own the street as well. And if they own the street, that means the car does not, it means the trucks don't. How can we draw outside the lines or blur the lines? How can we take a private space like a courtyard you see here and turn it into a performing arts space? Or perhaps bring in a farmer's market on a Saturday? Anything to cause people to gather and connect where they might meet somebody they don't know, they might exchange an idea, or they might learn something new that they wouldn't have had they not been there. My favorite, kill your car, save your mother, not literally your mother, but Mother Earth. I think the automobile is the bane of our existence. I think it causes many, many problems for us. And one notion we have is how can we develop and operate buildings that are within what I like to call 20-minute living. Within 20 minutes, I want to be able to walk to work, walk to church, walk to the theater, walk home, walk anywhere. And if I can't walk, I want to ride bikes. We've got a building that our biggest problem in the building is bicycle tire marks going down the corridor. What a wonderful thing. Everybody's commuting downtown by bike. And if you can't take a bike, take a streetcar. Anything but single occupant automobile. I often think that art and architecture are one and the same. Two things on architecture that I think about. One is how do you knit a building into a neighborhood as opposed to impose it on a neighborhood. The second one is coming back to Bobby's notion of generations. How can you design a building that not only today, but future generations are going to look at that building and it's going to cause them to stop and think and ask, what was the architect thinking when he or she designed it? And how is that building additive to the community as opposed to detrimental to the community? How can it create interactions with people? One of my favorite pieces of public art is out in front of Powell's Books, and you've probably seen it. It's on the Triangle on Burnside. Large metal sculpture. It's got 3 legs on it, if you will. Looks, to me anyway, looks like an inverted wheat shaft. If you go up against it, you can push it. And I used to watch that out my window, and I'd see people go up and stare at it, scratch their head, and I'd swear half of them would look at it and think it's the dumbest thing they've ever seen. The other half would look at it and think it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. But what did both of those people do? They stopped, they paused. It took them out of their day, and it took them out of their everyday pressures. And maybe they met somebody new that they exchanged ideas on that piece of art. History. History matters. You're sitting in history. I think of it in 2 fashions. Number 1, perhaps the most sustainable form of development is the repurposing of historic buildings and bringing them back to life. This used to be a military barracks. Doesn't look like it today. But think of all the embedded energy that's in this building. The energy was saved by not demolishing it. The energy was saved by not pouring new concrete or putting new bricks in. The second thing about history, it talks to us about our forefathers. It talks to us about a history of place. Again, principles of place. And it speaks to future generations as well. When I got out of school, we all thought we were going to change the world. We did to a certain extent, some good, some not so good, more good than not so good, I think. One of the things I think we're really starting to get right now is sustainability and vibrant cities need to be for everybody, not just the wealthiest, but also for the neediest in our community. If you look around you and walk within a block or 2, you'll find housing here for the most wealthy in the community, and you'll find housing for the most needy in the community. And it's that kind of integrated community that we need to think more and more about and develop as we go down the road. So what's next? You know, in our industry, people used to get excited when you did a LEED Gold building or LEED Platinum building like this. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's a yawner. You know, we've got to move beyond that. Today, what gets people excited is net zero, and it's happening. Net zero buildings, where we're generating more energy than we're consuming more waste than we're producing, and we think about it in the form of energy, water, sewage, and solid waste. And why don't we have the opportunity to do regenerative buildings? Where buildings actually heal the community around them, where the air that they put out and the water they put out is cleaner than the air and the water that they take in. I've talked today a lot about new construction and new buildings and building community in green cities. You know, in a boom year, which we haven't seen for a while, but in a boom year, we add maybe 1% to 2% of new construction to our inventory. What are we doing with the other 98%? What an opportunity to go out and retrofit those buildings to make them highly efficient from an energy, water, and sewage perspective. And last, I think the software side, what I call the software side of the business, which is us. That's the human factor. How can we cause people to think and act differently in how they live, work, and play in our cities and our communities? The old notion of you can drag a horse to water, but you can't cause it to drink. Well, I want to enable that horse to drink, and I want it to drink a big gulp of sustainability and rich communities. So why is this important? I think we all know. A lot of people say we're running out of time, and maybe that's the case. I hearken back to Bobby's notion of generations. This is a photo of my first unborn grandchild, and it is a son, will join us in September. I don't think so much about my generation, or quite frankly, my children's generation. What I think we need to think about, and what challenges us to think about, as Bobby did, is multiple future generations. And we have the opportunity to leave this planet better than we found it. And as for my friend Bob, as with Jim, unfortunately, he contracted a disease also. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. But I know he's up there looking down on all of us, asking the question, are we making a difference? And I'm sure he's asking what is my favorite question, and that's what's the big, stupid idea? Because that big, stupid idea might be just the one that's transformational, that allows us to move the needle faster today. Thank you.